All right, good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome to The Real Story. I am Matt Caron. Well, the state of Connecticut has paused phase 3 of the reopening plan. But when it comes to the reopening of schools in the fall, it is all systems go. And here to talk to us about it and break down the state's plan is Fran Rabinowitz. She is the executive director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. Fran, thanks for being with us. It's always great to talk to you.
Matt, thank you for inviting me in, and I'm very happy to talk about the reopening plan, which has been in the works now for several weeks, and superintendents are working very hard with their teams to put plans together in every school district.
Sure, so let's jump right in. Most recent news here, Commissioner Cardona was on a digital town hall with some teachers, some parents. The governor was on it as well. And I know you listened in on that call. What did you learn from it? Does it give you more or less confidence that we can safely reopen schools in the fall?
What I liked about it was Commissioner Gibbons was on there from the Department of Public Health, and it was very helpful and comforting for her to talk to us about following the protocols which are in the reopening plan, and her telling us that the combination of following those protocols she felt would create a healthy and safe environment for the students.
Fran, I was actually down in Norwalk recently this week where they had somebody at the high school test positive for COVID on day one of opening summer school. And we're just talking about summer school. I mean, come the fall, we're going to have even more kids in the classroom and more staff in the schools. I mean, is that a precursor to what we could see in the fall?
I do believe that, the trends, thankfully, Connecticut is a premier state in lessening the trends of COVID-19 and the occurrences of COVID-19. But absolutely, Matt, we have to be prepared for either staff or a family member or a student to have COVID-19, and we need to have guardrails on how we are going to deal with that. And right now in the plans, it is somewhat specific, but there's more guidance coming out as to how to deal with that, with quarantining, with closing that particular classroom, depending on how it has permeated the school, perhaps closing the school for a period of time. And there are very clear delineations of how that will happen. And luckily, every school district also has to prepare a distance learning plan so that we're hopeful that while we believe certainly learning is more effective when the students are in person, if the school needs to be closed or the classroom those children need to be at home for quarantine, they can immediately that following day continue teaching and learning through distance learning.
Yep. You just brought this up, Fran, so let's get into a little bit. As you mentioned, districts need to submit their implementation plan to the state by July 24th, and there's 3 different plans that they're being asked to come up with. One is for a full reopening, and then another one is for closing again and then doing distance learning, as you mentioned. But then there's this hybrid model, and that's what I kind of wanted to get into, because there's an equity piece, isn't there, when it comes to that? I mean, especially the disparities between the districts financially. What kind of a burden could a hybrid model be on schools?
A hybrid model can be incredibly expensive because let's just say you are you're looking first of all at transportation. If you're in a hybrid model, your school buses cannot run at capacity. if there is, an issue with occurrences. So you have far more buses, and that in and of itself is expensive. If you're doing 2 days in and 2 days out, those 2 days out on distance learning, you're also asking for more teachers. And if you're spreading the children out further, because of occurrences or concerns about that, you do need additional teachers or paraprofessionals that will be overseen by the teachers in additional classrooms.
And let me stop you right there, because I think that's important. Where do you get those teachers from? I mean, do you anticipate that this pandemic could actually spur some older teachers who might be in that high-risk category to retire? What's the plan to replace them, and does that mean relying more on substitute teachers?
Well, there are a couple of things here, Matt, that you bring up. Absolutely, do I expect that we will have some older teachers that will say, I'm at risk, or we may have a teacher with an elderly parent that feels, or a member of the family with immune deficiency who feels that it's just too great a risk to go in person to school. I'm hopeful that we can somehow work it out where some of those teachers, who I'm sure are excellent teachers, could teach from home in a distance learning format. However, it still leaves us with a need for additional teachers at the school level. And we are concerned about that. I mean, we've been talking about how we might make that happen, how we might hire people, candidates who have just completed a teacher prep program, who would be available to come in to schools, certainly substitute teachers. Also, paraprofessionals that work with teachers under the supervision of teachers, taking smaller groups in another location. And all in all, Matt, the cost of that is definitely a burden to the school districts. And as we know, school districts have already had their budgets cut in most cases. So we are looking, and there are promises from the state for funding for this. I also understand
and speaking of funding, sorry to cut you off, Fran. I just want to get to a couple more questions here. Speaking of funding, busing is going to be a big issue. I know districts are scrambling. Maybe they're trying to hire bus monitors. They're trying to, stagger their buses. What do you think the plan should be? I mean, I know the last time we spoke, you had some concerns about those 3 kids to a seat. Is that still the right way to go from a public health perspective?
They're saying that if there's low incidence, we can fill the buses almost to capacity. I think I would be more comfortable with 2 students in a seat with some space in between. But again, I'm an educator. I need to take the direction from the Department of Public Health. If the Department of Public Health is telling me that they feel that students will be cohorted in that group and that it is safe, then I am not going to question the Department of Health and the medical profession, because they know more than I do.
Fran, you are an educator, and so I wanted to ask you this. Classroom teachers, you know as well as I do, they're jacks of all trades. I mean, they're asked to educate, they're role models for their students, they're part, therapist, part parent, part friend. How much learning do you think is actually going to go on this next school year? I mean, is it just going to be one big babysitting year, making sure that these kids follow the mask guidelines?
Well, the teachers that I know, Matt, that is not going to happen. They are incredibly creative, innovative practitioners. They're going to find a way to do what is their passion, and that is to educate every child in that classroom. And they'll find a way. And yes, the masks will be an additional burden. Yes, the spacing will be an additional burden. But I know our teachers, look what they did with distance learning. They jumped into it within 3 or 4 days and really came up with some very innovative practices. They'll do the same thing here. So no, it will not be a babysitting year. It will be a teaching and learning year. And we're planning for that and have been planning for it since March. We'll find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, my wife's a third grade teacher, so I definitely have a huge appreciation for teachers. And you mentioned distance learning. My wife's been doing it from upstairs, teaching her kids through the distance learning systems. Do you think that even when this pandemic is over, that distance learning is going to be a part of education going forward?
I do. I have this vision. I believe that it will be incredibly helpful, even if we're in person, for students to have extended learning experiences. And guess what? Even as the superintendent, I loved snow days. I did. It was a freeing feeling. Not even though I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, there was something nice about snow days. I honestly am not sure we will see snow days anymore because our meteorologists can pretty well predict the storms that are coming. And I think teachers will be telling students to take their devices home. And I believe we'll be in a distance learning mode on snow days. There's nothing yet in moving forward on that, but I do believe that will be something of the future.
That's a very interesting point. Rachel Frank and her team will be happy to hear your vote of confidence for meteorologists. Fran, I wanted to ask you this. Do you believe that students, or do you believe that teachers, rather, should be getting their teacher evaluations this coming year, given the difficult environment that they're going to be asked to educate in? And on that same token, do you believe that students should be given standardized tests?
Two things that I'd like to look at as the school year unfolds. I mean, if our numbers stay low, we may in fact be back in school. And if we're back in school, I don't see a reason why we wouldn't embark on teacher evaluation. If, however, we're not, I think we have to talk about it and figure out how we might do that. I think I want to be sure that every teacher that's in front of a student is a quality teacher. And from what I've said already, I believe in teachers, in the power of teachers. But I also know we're going to have many new teachers in there and in the field. I think we need to be able to observe and develop and help them. So I'm hoping that we'll find some very innovative ways to do that. As far as standardized testing, I would leave that to the State Department and to the teachers and leaders. I do believe that it is of secondary importance to getting the students back and getting teaching and learning and a robust program in the schools. I'm more concerned about teachers being able to do some type of their own formative assessment to find out where students are and get them on track with teaching and learning. If the standardized tests can be given, if it's not an additional burden, if the school year is a school year that's moving forward as normal as possible, that's a different story. We really have to wait and see what unfolds.
Fran, we have just about 30 seconds for this last question, but I want to end it on this. If there is a full reopening in the fall, even though it is the fall, beginning of the school year can often be very hot. A lot of schools don't have air conditioning, and now they're being told they can't use fans to circulate the air. Is this going to be a problem on those hot days?
Well, I think that we're really going to have to take a very close look at it. As a former superintendent, I know that I had some schools where the air conditioning wasn't functioning, that it was very, very hot. I had to resort to early dismissal sometimes, and I think we're going to have to take a very close look as we move forward. And we have to know with our local public health officials, if the air quality is not healthy, then we definitely have to find an alternate site, or we may need to dismiss.
Fran Rabinowitz, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much, Matt.
All right, coming up next on The Real Story, did anybody really run out of toilet paper? The pandemic cleared consumer staple goods from grocery store shelves and also transformed the grocery industry. So coming up next, we'll sit down with the Connecticut Food Association to talk all about it.